Chapter 1. The Dawn of the Replicators. There is a question that every thinking person eventually asks, usually in the quiet hours of the night when the rush of daily life finally subsides. You might be standing under a canopy of stars, or looking out over a restless ocean, or simply staring at the ceiling in a silent room. The question is as old as human consciousness itself. Why are we here? What is the fundamental point of this breathing, striving, feeling existence we find ourselves thrown into? For millennia we sought answers in the sky, in myths, and in the comforting stories passed down through generations. We looked everywhere but the one place that actually held the truth, deep within the microscopic architecture of our own bodies. To understand the truth of our existence, we must first strip away a very comforting, very deeply ingrained illusion. It is an illusion that most of us are taught from childhood. We are taught to look at the natural world as a harmonious, cooperative enterprise. If you walk into a dense, ancient forest, it is easy to fall for this romantic vision. You see a towering canopy of leaves filtering the sunlight, mosses blanketing the damp earth, and a staggering variety of creatures moving through the underbrush. It looks for all the world like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, where every organism plays its part for the greater good of the forest. But if you look closely, without the lens of poetry or wishful thinking, a different and far more rigorous reality emerges. That forest is not a cooperative utopia. Every single root beneath your feet is locked in a silent, ruthless, and eternal chokehold with its neighbors, fighting for the last drop of moisture. Every leaf high above is angled to cast shade on a rival, desperately stealing the sunlight required for its own survival. The forest is not a community working together for the good of the whole. It is an architecture of pure, unadulterated self-interest. This realization can feel cold at first, but it is actually the gateway to the most profound and awe-inspiring truth about life on this planet. To understand how this fierce self-interest came to be the defining characteristic of life, we have to journey back to a time long before forests, long before animals, and long before anything that we would recognize as living. We have to go back to the very beginning, to a time when the Earth was a volatile, violent rock spinning in a newly formed solar system. Before life, there was only chemistry and physics. The universe was, and still is, governed by a very simple, undeniable law: the survival of the stable. The universe is populated by things that are stable enough to stick around. Imagine a child trying to build a tower out of irregularly shaped, rounded river stones. The child stacks one stone on top of another, but because of their uneven shapes, the stones constantly slip and crash back to the floor. The child tries again and again, creating dozens of fleeting, unstable arrangements. But eventually, purely by trial and error, the child happens to place the stones in a configuration where their angles interlock perfectly. The center of gravity is low, the weight is distributed, and the tower stands. The tower does not have a conscious desire to remain standing. It simply possesses the physical geometry of stability. In the chaotic, swirling storms of the early universe, atoms were constantly colliding, forming fleeting partnerships that instantly broke apart. But every so often, they bumped into a configuration that was stable. They locked together and stayed together. On the young, turbulent Earth, the oceans were a vast chemical broth. Over millions of years, lightning strikes and relentless ultraviolet radiation from the sun battered this broth, forcing atoms into increasingly complex, stable configurations. And then, at some point in the unimaginable depths of time, an extraordinarily improbable accident occurred. A new kind of molecule was formed. It was not necessarily the biggest or the most complex molecule in the sea, but it had a property so revolutionary that it would forever alter the destiny of the planet. It had the ability to make copies of itself. We can call this molecule the replicator. To understand how it worked, you do not need a degree in biochemistry. You just need to imagine a template. Picture a long chain of interlocking building blocks floating in a sea filled with millions of loose, unattached blocks. Because of the physical shape of the chain, it has a natural magnetic affinity for the loose blocks around it. As a loose block bumps against the chain, it snaps into the only slot that fits its shape. Gradually, a second chain forms, perfectly mirroring the first. They split apart, and suddenly there are 2 templates in the water, then 4, then 8. Within a geological blink of an eye, the ancient oceans were teeming with identical copies of this master molecule. But there is a universal truth about the act of copying, whether it is done by a chemical template or a human hand. It is never entirely perfect. Mistakes are inevitable. Think of a master storyteller in a time before written language, passing down a grand epic poem to an apprentice. The apprentice memorizes it and later teaches it to his own student. Inevitably, a word is forgotten, a phrase is altered, a name is mispronounced. Most of the time, these errors ruin the rhythm of the poem. The meaning is lost, the audience grows bored, and that version of the story dies out. But once in a great while, a storyteller makes a mistake that actually improves the poem. The accidental phrase has a more profound emotional resonance. It is more gripping, more memorable. That altered version suddenly becomes the favorite. It is requested more often, taught to more apprentices, and soon the mistake becomes the new standard. In the primeval oceans, the replicators made copying errors. Most of these mistakes resulted in unstable molecules that quickly fell apart and dissolved back into the chemical soup. But occasionally, a mistake resulted in a molecule that was slightly more stable, or capable of copying itself a fraction of a second faster, or capable of making fewer errors in its own subsequent copies. It is here that the great engine of evolution flared into life. The ocean was not infinite. The loose building blocks required to make copies eventually became a scarce resource. The different varieties of replicators were now in a blind, unconscious competition. A replicator that copied itself quickly and accurately consumed the available building blocks before its slower rivals could. The slower replicators simply lacked the materials to continue, and their lines vanished. As the competition grew fiercer, the accidental copying errors produced increasingly sophisticated tools for survival. Some replicators developed a chemical trick to break apart the molecules of their rivals, stealing their building blocks to use for themselves. They became the first microscopic predators. In response, other replicators accidentally developed a protective wall of protein around themselves, a physical barrier against the chemical attacks. These were the first primitive cells. The era of floating freely in the ocean was over. To survive the brutal, relentless competition, the replicators had to build increasingly elaborate walls, defenses, and tools. The process was cumulative. A protective shell was no longer enough. The shell needed a way to move toward richer hunting grounds. The movement required an engine, which required fuel, which required a system to process energy. The survival machines grew larger, more intricate, and more formidable. Millions of years passed. The competition forced the machines out of the oceans and onto the land, into the skies and beneath the soil. They developed limbs to run, lungs to breathe, and complex networks of nerves to process the surrounding chaos. You might be wondering where those ancient, relentless replicating molecules are today. You will not find them floating loose in the ocean. They gave up that cavalier freedom eons ago. Today, they swarm in huge colonies, perfectly safe inside gigantic, lumbering robots. They are sealed off from the outside world, communicating with it by tortuous, indirect routes, manipulating it by remote control. They are in you. They are in me. They created us, body and mind. We are their survival machines, constructed for the sole purpose of carrying them safely through time. The original replicators have not vanished. They simply go by a new name now. We call them genes. And everything we are, everything we build, and everything we love is ultimately deeply entwined with their ancient, unyielding drive to endure. Chapter 2. The Survival Machine. When you look in the mirror every morning, you experience a profound and entirely convincing illusion. You see a single, unified being staring back at you. You feel like a singular I. You have one name, one continuous stream of memories, and one cohesive personality. But the staggering biological reality is that you are not a single entity at all. You are a monumentally vast colony. You are a collective, a walking, breathing federation of trillions of microscopic cells, all working together in such perfect harmony that you never even notice the seams. And at the absolute center of every single one of those cells lies the true master of this federation. A microscopic thread of instructions that has been traveling across the earth for billions of years. To understand the sheer magnitude of what you are, we must look at how the ancient blind replicating molecules of the primeval oceans eventually became the architects of such magnificent vehicles. The original molecules, drifting in the water, only needed a simple protein shell to protect themselves. But as the world grew more crowded and more dangerous, a passive shell was no longer enough. The environment demanded action. It demanded the ability to harvest energy, to pursue nourishment, and to flee from danger. The replicators had to build machines capable of navigating a three-dimensional world. Today, those replicators are made of DNA. You can think of a DNA molecule as a master blueprint, a set of architectural plans written in an alphabet that contains only 4 letters. It is a language of breathtaking simplicity, yet it is capable of describing the unfathomable complexity of an eagle's wing, a whale's heart, or the human brain. Every single cell in your body contains a complete, identical copy of this master blueprint securely locked away in a central vault. It is as if every single brick in a skyscraper contained a microscopic copy of the architect's plans for the entire city. These DNA molecules do 2 vital things. First, they replicate. They create perfect copies of themselves, a process they have been refining for billions of years. From the moment you were a single fertilized cell, your DNA copied itself flawlessly as you grew into a being of trillions of cells. Second, and crucially, they supervise the building of the body. They read the 4-letter code and translate it into the physical materials that make up your muscles, your bones, your blood, and your nervous system. But here is where we must shift our perspective and embrace a humbling truth. The body is not the point of the story. The body is merely the packaging. The survival machine is temporary. It is born, it grows, it ages, and it inevitably breaks down and dies. The DNA, however, is potentially immortal. Your body is just a disposable vehicle built to transport this code safely from one generation to the next. Think of a deck of playing cards. When a game is played, a hand of cards is dealt. That hand is unique. The specific combination of the King of Hearts, the 7 of Spades, and the 3 of Clubs might only come together once in a lifetime. That temporary hand of cards is you. It is your physical body, your unique personality, the specific combination of traits that makes you who you are. But when the game is over, the hand is dissolved. The cards are gathered up and shuffled back into the deck. The hand is gone forever, but the cards themselves are untouched. They are entirely unaffected by the shuffling. They simply wait to be dealt into a new hand, in a new game, in a new generation. The genes are the cards. They leap from body to body down the millennia, temporarily cooperating to build a vehicle, only to abandon it before it sinks into old age and death. They do not grow old. A gene that is 1,000,000 years old is no more tired or fragile than a gene that was formed yesterday. It simply marches on. But if these genes are independent, immortal travelers, how do they manage to cooperate so beautifully to build something as complex as a human body? After all, building a leg or an eye is not the work of a single gene. It is a massive, coordinated symphony involving thousands of different instructions. Imagine an eccentric billionaire trying to put together the ultimate mountain climbing expedition. He needs a perfectly balanced team. A brilliant navigator, a seasoned medic, a fearless lead climber, and a resourceful cook. Instead of interviewing them, he forces thousands of candidates to draw lots, forming random teams of 4. He then drops these teams onto the harshest peaks in the world and watches what happens. Most teams fail instantly. Perhaps one team has 3 brilliant navigators but no cook, and they starve. Another team has 4 fearless lead climbers who constantly argue over the route until they freeze to death. But purely by chance, one team has the perfect combination of skills. They communicate well, they cover each other's weaknesses, and they reach the summit. The billionaire does not reward the team as a single unit. He simply notes the surviving individuals and puts them back into the pool for the next random drawing. Over time, after thousands of harsh winters and countless failed expeditions, a pattern emerges. The individuals who consistently survive and make it into the final pool are not just those who are individually strong, they are the ones who play well with others. A cook who is magnificent but refuses to share food will cause his team to die, and he will perish with them. The survivors are those who possess a natural synergy with the other talents in the pool. This is exactly how genes operate within the gene pool. They are selfish, independent entities, but the environment they must survive in is largely composed of other genes. A gene that builds sharp carnivorous teeth is a brilliant survival tool, but only if it happens to be randomly dealt into a body that also has the digestive enzymes capable of processing meat. If that gene for sharp teeth finds itself in a body built for eating leaves, it will cause the body to starve. The gene will perish, not because it was inherently weak, but because it lacked teamwork. Over millions of years of brutal trial and error, the gene pool becomes a finely tuned cooperative society of surviving code. As these cooperating genes built more complex survival machines, they encountered a profound problem. DNA operates on a timescale of months and years. It takes months of slow, meticulous protein synthesis to construct an embryo, but the world outside the womb operates in milliseconds. When a predator lunges from the shadows or a rock falls from a cliff, the survival machine must react instantly. The genes, locked deep inside the cells, are far too slow to pull the puppet strings in real time. To solve this, the genes had to invent a new technology. They had to build an onboard executive computer. We call this computer the brain, and its wiring system the nerves. The relationship between the genes and the brain is fundamentally similar to the relationship between an aerospace engineer and a deep space probe. Imagine a team of brilliant engineers launching a robotic rover to a distant, uncharted exoplanet, a journey that will take hundreds of years. The engineers cannot fly the probe with a joystick. By the time a video feed of a hazardous crater reaches Earth and the engineers send the command to turn left, years will have passed and the probe will have already crashed into the abyss. Because of this insurmountable time lag, the engineers cannot control the machine. They can only program it. They must build the rover with optical sensors to read the terrain, wheels to move, and a highly sophisticated computer loaded with general rules and strategies. They program the probe with instructions like, if you detect a sudden drop in elevation, reverse your motors. If your solar panels are shaded, seek the light. Once the rocket engines ignite and the probe disappears into the dark ocean of space, the engineers are powerless. The probe is entirely on its own. Its survival depends completely on how well its creators anticipated the unknown dangers of the future. Your genes are those master engineers. You are the deep space probe. The genes cannot tell you to jump out of the way of a speeding car. It takes too long for DNA to send a chemical message. Instead, they pre-programmed your onboard computer. They built you with eyes to detect motion, ears to hear the screech of tires, and a massive network of muscles primed with adrenaline. They gave you general rules. Pain is bad, avoid it. Sweet food is good, eat it. A roaring sound approaching rapidly is dangerous, run. Once you are born into the world, the genes sit back in silence. You are the executive. You are at the helm. As brains evolved, they developed an increasingly miraculous tool to help them navigate this unpredictable world, the power of simulation. We usually call it imagination. Think of an experienced rock climber facing a sheer, unmapped cliff. A lesser organism would approach the cliff using raw trial and error. It would grab a rock, pull itself up, and if the rock crumbled, it would fall to its death. Trial and error is effective, but the cost of error is often fatal. The human rock climber, however, stands at the base of the cliff and looks up. She closes her eyes and runs the route in her mind. She visualizes shifting her weight to her left foot. She imagines the reach of her right arm. She anticipates the physical toll of a precarious overhang. She can try out a dozen different paths, experience a dozen virtual falls, and discard the dangerous routes, all without moving a single muscle. This ability to simulate the future in the safety of the mind is one of the greatest triumphs of the survival machine. It allows us to test our choices in a virtual environment before risking our physical bodies in the real one. And it is this very mechanism of simulation that likely gave rise to the most profound mystery of our existence: consciousness. As the brain's simulations became more complex, more detailed, and more accurate, it eventually had to include a model of the machine itself. The brain had to understand where the body ended and the world began. It had to create a virtual avatar of the self to move through these mental simulations. When a survival machine becomes fully aware of its own existence within its own simulation, the lights of consciousness turn on. This brings us to a beautiful, empowering paradox. The genes created us. They built our bodies, wired our nervous systems, and programmed our deepest desires. They designed us to be ruthless, efficient engines for their own propagation. But in their quest to build the ultimate survival machine, they did their job a little too well. By giving us massive brains capable of profound simulation and self-awareness, they accidentally handed over the keys to the kingdom. We are the only survival machines on the planet capable of rebelling against the very code that created us. When we choose to use contraceptives, deliberately blocking the propagation of our genes because we desire freedom or focus, we are staging a rebellion. When a person dedicates their entire life to art, or charity, or the pursuit of truth, rather than the relentless pursuit of reproduction, they are defying the ancient masters in their cells. We may be machines built by blind, selfish molecules, but we have evolved the capacity to seize the controls. We can choose to be kind, to be generous, and to look beyond the brutal calculus of survival. But to truly understand how to build a cooperative and just world, we must first understand the default programming we are working against. We must look at what happens when these selfish survival machines encounter one another in the wild, and how the mathematics of conflict secretly govern the rules of life and death. Chapter 3. The Logic of Conflict. You are walking down a crowded city street, rushing toward a highly coveted empty parking space. Just as you are about to step off the curb to claim it, someone else darts in from the opposite direction. Your heart rate spikes, your jaw clenches, and a surge of ancient primal adrenaline floods your system. You want that space. You feel you deserve that space. But what do you actually do? You do not draw a weapon. You do not engage in a brutal bare-knuckle fight to the death in the middle of the street. You might shout, you might glare, but eventually one of you backs down and walks away. We like to flatter ourselves by believing that this restraint is purely a product of human civilization, a testament to our moral laws and elevated consciousness. But that comforting notion obscures a much older, deeper truth. This exact same restrained conflict happens every single day in the wild, long before police, prisons, or philosophies ever existed. Look at the natural world. To a survival machine, another survival machine of the same species is just a part of the environment. It is a piece of the landscape that happens to be uniquely frustrating because it wants the exact same food, the exact same shelter, and the exact same mates. The most logical, ruthlessly efficient strategy might seem to be outright murder. Why not just kill every single rival you meet and take what is theirs? To understand why nature is not an endless, blood-soaked slaughterhouse, we must look at the hidden, inescapable mathematics of conflict. Suppose you are locked in a struggle with two intense rivals in your environment. If you risk everything in a violent, exhausting fight to kill the first rival, you might succeed, but in doing so, you have expended massive amounts of your own precious calories, you have likely sustained a crippling injury, and most importantly, you have just done an enormous free favor for your second rival. You have removed their competition for them, while absorbing all the damage yourself. It is often far more profitable to let your rivals exhaust themselves fighting each other, while you wait quietly in the wings. Fighting is incredibly expensive. It costs time, it burns energy, and it carries the devastating, permanent risk of injury. Therefore, the genes that survive are the ones that program their machines to perform a lightning-fast, unconscious cost-benefit analysis before ever baring their teeth. Imagine an isolated population of creatures, let us call them the pacifists. In this society, whenever two individuals want the same piece of food, they never resort to physical violence. They simply posture. They puff out their chests, they raise their hackles, and they stare each other down in long, dignified tournaments of bluffing. Eventually one gets tired and walks away. No one ever bleeds. No one ever gets hurt. It seems like a perfect, harmonious utopia. But this utopia is mathematically doomed. All it takes is one mutant individual who is wired slightly differently. This individual is a fighter. When a fighter meets a pacifist, the pacifist immediately surrenders to avoid injury. The fighter sweeps through this gentle society like a wildfire, claiming every resource, dominating every interaction, and leaving behind a massive number of offspring who share that exact same aggressive code. The utopia crumbles under the weight of pure exploitation. However, a society of pure fighters is equally doomed. As the fighters multiply, they begin running into each other. Every dispute over a scrap of food becomes a brutal, escalating war. Many die. Most are horribly maimed. In a world where every single encounter ends in a catastrophic physical injury, the cost of living becomes impossibly high. Now, the tables are turned. In this brutal arena, a rare pacifist actually possesses a massive advantage. While the fighters are busy tearing each other apart and nursing broken limbs, the pacifist sneaks around the edges, avoiding all physical damage, quietly gathering the leftover resources and surviving to breed. What emerges from this theoretical seesaw is one of the most profound principles in all of biology, the stable strategy. The population will not swing wildly forever. It will eventually settle into a perfectly balanced rhythm. It reaches a state where being purely aggressive no longer pays, and being purely passive no longer pays. The ultimate winner in this evolutionary casino is usually the strategist who walks softly but carries a big stick. We can call this the retaliator. A retaliator begins every encounter with polite, conventional posturing. They do not strike first. They behave exactly like a pacifist. But the moment their opponent escalates to physical violence, the retaliator unleashes hell. They fight back with devastating, uncompromising force. This strategy is incredibly robust. It cannot be exploited by bullies because the retaliator strikes back, and it does not waste unnecessary energy fighting peaceful neighbors. It is a strategy of measured, conditional restraint, and it is the reason why so much of animal conflict looks like a gentleman's duel with blunted swords rather than a murderous brawl. Sometimes, however, animals do not even possess the weapons to physically destroy one another. Think of two heavily armored creatures, perfectly protected by thick shells. When they compete for a territory, they cannot bite or claw through the armor. Instead, they engage in a war of attrition. They settle disputes using the only currency available to them, time. They simply stand there, glaring at each other, waiting for the other to give up. The prize goes to the one who holds out the longest. But here is the magnificent twist of the war of attrition. You must never, ever let your opponent know when you are planning to quit. Imagine you are playing a high-stakes game of poker. If your face betrays a tiny, involuntary flicker of anxiety right before you fold, the other players will instantly learn to read that twitch. They will simply wait for your eye to twitch, and then they will raise the bet, knowing with absolute certainty that you are about to collapse. In the wild, if an animal's posture reveals that it is getting tired and will probably give up in exactly 1 minute, the opponent only has to wait 1 minute and 1 second to claim the prize. Therefore, natural selection mercilessly punishes any physical display of fatigue or weakness. The ultimate survival machine in a war of attrition must evolve a perfect, unreadable poker face. The surrender, when it finally comes, must be absolute, sudden, and completely unpredictable. But nature is rarely a perfectly level playing field. Conflicts are almost always asymmetrical. One animal is slightly larger, or slightly older, or has a little more to lose. The most fascinating asymmetry of all is the simplest one. Someone arrived first. When two creatures meet in a clearing, one is usually the resident who has been living there, and the other is an intruder wandering through. They could fight a bloody battle to decide who gets the clearing, but evolution has discovered a far more elegant, universally accepted rule to settle the dispute without shedding a drop of blood. The resident always wins, and the intruder always retreats. It sounds almost like a human legal system, a microscopic version of property rights, but it is not born from a sense of fairness or morality. It is born from cold mathematical stability. If a mutant population tried to play the opposite rule, where the intruder fights to the death and the resident automatically flees, the world would descend into chaotic, endless motion. Everyone would constantly run away from their own homes just to become an intruder somewhere else, wasting catastrophic amounts of time and energy. The rule of resident wins is a stable, self-enforcing pact. It is the invisible, calculating architect of what we call territorial behavior. We see this same brilliant, calculated restraint in the social ladders of tightly knit groups. When animals live together in herds or flocks, they quickly learn who is stronger and who is weaker. They remember their past defeats. If you are a young, inexperienced animal and you encounter a massive, scarred veteran who has beaten you 3 times before, it is suicidal folly to fight him again for a piece of food. You submit immediately. By accepting a lower rank, you save your energy, you preserve your physical health, and you bide your time until you are strong enough to challenge him, or until he grows old and weak. This creates a dominance hierarchy, a rank ordering where everyone knows their place. To the casual observer, it looks as though the group has consciously organized itself for the greater peace and harmony of the community. But once again, the harmony is an illusion. The peace of the herd is merely the byproduct of dozens of selfish individuals independently calculating that it is currently more profitable to submit than to die. We have built a picture of a world governed by invisible, ironclad rules of conflict. Survival machines do not fight blindly. They weigh the odds, they read the terrain, they remember past battles, and they follow complex strategies honed over billions of years of ruthless selection. They are incredibly sophisticated, calculating engines of self-preservation. But this entire framework assumes that the rival standing across the battlefield is a stranger. It assumes that their survival does nothing to help your own. What happens when the opponent staring back at you shares the exact same immortal code that you carry inside your own cells? What happens when the ruthless mathematics of selfishness suddenly demand the ultimate act of selfless sacrifice? To answer that, we must venture past the boundaries of the individual and into the profound, invisible bonds of the family. Chapter 4. The Calculus of Kinship. Imagine standing on the edge of a freezing, fast-flowing river. Suddenly you see a child thrashing in the current, being swept away toward treacherous rapids. The water is violent, and jumping in means a very real, terrifying risk to your own life. If that child is a total stranger, you might hesitate. You might frantically look around for a rope, shout for help, or weigh your own swimming abilities against the deadly speed of the water. But what if that child is your own daughter? What if it is your younger brother? In those instances, the hesitation vanishes. You dive in. You do not think about the cold, the current, or your own survival. You surrender your own safety in an instant. We call this love. We call it devotion, bravery, or the highest nobility of the human spirit. But beneath the poetry of our deepest emotions, there is an invisible calculating machinery at work. To understand why we are willing to lay down our lives for our families, we have to return to a fundamental truth about our nature. The immortal code inside us is not confined to our own bodies. Remember that a gene is not just a single physical microscopic thread sitting in one specific cell. A gene is information. It is a piece of code, and copies of that exact same code are distributed across the world in multiple different bodies. If the ultimate goal of a gene is to ensure that as many copies of itself as possible survive into the next generation, it faces a fascinating logical puzzle. How can a gene sitting in your body help a replica of itself sitting in another body? It could, in theory, create an arbitrary physical label. Imagine if a specific gene caused an animal to grow a bright purple patch of fur, while simultaneously wiring the animal's brain to feel fierce, protective loyalty toward any other animal with that exact same purple patch. The gene would recognize itself in a stranger and compel the animal to protect its fellow purple-patched companion. Mathematically, it is possible. But biologically, it is highly improbable that a single gene could successfully manage both a complex physical trait and a highly specific behavioral quirk without the system breaking down. So, how do the genes know where their copies reside? They use the most reliable, foolproof indicator in the natural world: kinship, family. You and your sibling share the same parents. Because of the way reproduction blindly shuffles the genetic deck, there is a 50% chance that any single gene inside you is also sitting inside your sibling. You share 1/2 of your genetic blueprint. With a niece or a nephew, the genetic overlap is 1/4. With a first cousin, it is 1/8. This simple, elegant math is the hidden architecture of family love. Let us picture a scenario to understand how this brutal, beautiful calculus works in the wild. Imagine a family of ground-dwelling animals foraging in a field. An eagle suddenly swoops down from the sky. One of the siblings spots the predator first. If this animal stays completely silent and ducks into the grass, it is absolutely safe. But if it gives a loud, piercing alarm call, it draws the eagle's deadly attention to itself. Giving the alarm call is an act of pure, suicidal altruism. If this animal had no siblings, a gene for giving an alarm call would be an evolutionary disaster. The animal would scream, the eagle would eat it, and the alarm call gene would be permanently erased from the world. But this animal is surrounded by 3 siblings. By giving the call, the animal sacrifices itself, but its 3 siblings dive into their burrows and survive. Now look at the invisible ledger of the genes. The animal that died contained one copy of the alarm call gene. But because it saved 3 siblings, and each sibling has a 50% chance of carrying that exact same gene, the alarm call gene has actually multiplied its chances of survival. By sacrificing one vehicle, the gene secured the survival of 1.5 vehicles. Over millions of years of life and death, the genes that program us to sacrifice ourselves for our close relatives become vastly more numerous. This means that, genetically speaking, your brother is worth exactly half of you. Your cousin is worth 1/8 of you. If you were an entirely logical, emotionless survival machine, you would gladly lay down your life to save exactly 2 of your brothers, or 4 of your nephews, or 8 of your first cousins. The math balances perfectly. But of course, real life does not operate in a perfect, frictionless vacuum. Animals do not carry calculators, and we do not pause in moments of crisis to work out the exact fractional relatedness of our family members. Furthermore, the math of love is profoundly complicated by the relentless reality of time. Imagine an older mother who finds herself in a desperate, life-or-death situation where she can only save one of 2 relatives, her aging father or her infant son. Genetically, her relatedness to both is identical. She shares exactly half her genes with her father and half her genes with her son. If the math were purely about fractions, it would be a toss-up. But we all know, instinctively and viscerally, that she will save the infant. Why? Because the genes act as ruthless, unsentimental life insurance actuaries. They do not just calculate relatedness, they calculate future potential. The aging grandfather has lived his life. His vehicle is nearing the end of its warranty. His potential to carry the genes into a distant, unborn future is practically 0. The infant, however, is a fresh vessel, brimming with decades of reproductive potential. The genes prioritize the infant because the infant represents a far better investment for the survival of the code. We experience this biological calculus as a fierce, protective, overwhelming love for our children. This brings us to a crucial, often uncomfortable asymmetry in the nature of family devotion. If the math says that a brother is worth half of you, why are we so often fiercely, undeniably selfish? Why do siblings fight so bitterly over resources, inheritance, and attention? It comes down to a concept we can call the certainty principle. The math of kinship is based on statistical probabilities, but survival machines live in a world of deception, confusion, and risk. You might only be 50% sure that a brother shares your genes. But there is one person in the world you are 100% sure of. You are absolutely certain that you carry your own genes. You are your own best investment. Because your certainty of yourself is absolute, the drive for individual survival will almost always override the drive for sibling altruism when push comes to shove. This certainty principle creates fascinating, profound ripples throughout the entire animal kingdom, especially in the difference between mothers and fathers. Across much of the natural world, mothers invest significantly more time, energy, and physical sacrifice into raising their young than fathers do. We often attribute this to a mystical maternal instinct, but the hidden architect of this devotion is certainty. When a mother gives birth, she has witnessed the child come from her own body. Her certainty that the child carries her genes is absolute. She knows. The father, however, is operating on faith. In the wild, where infidelity and hidden matings are common, a male can never be entirely, fundamentally certain that the offspring he is looking at is truly his own. Because his certainty is lower, his biological programming dictates that his investment of time and energy should also be lower. He is more vulnerable to being tricked into spending his life raising the genes of a rival. You can trace this cascading logic of certainty through the extended family tree. A maternal grandmother knows for a fact that her daughter had a child. Her certainty is rock solid. A paternal grandmother, however, only knows that her son's mate had a child. There is a broken link of doubt in the chain. Therefore, across many species and deeply embedded in our own human history, the maternal lines of kinship often display a fiercer, more uncompromising loyalty and altruism than the paternal lines. Yet, for all this incredible calculating brilliance, the genes are ultimately blind. They do not have eyes, they do not have conscious thoughts, and they do not understand the modern world. Because they are blind, they must program our brains with simple, blunt rules of thumb. They cannot program a bird to say, care for an infant that shares 50% of your genetic sequence. They must program the bird with a much simpler rule. If there is a crying, hungry thing in the nest that you built, feed it. Usually, this simple rule works perfectly. The thing in the bird's nest is almost certainly its own offspring. But because the rule is simple, it can be hacked. There are certain species of birds that never build their own nests. Instead, they wait for a smaller bird to leave its nest, swoop in, lay a massive egg, and fly away. When the foreign egg hatches, the parasitic chick is huge, loud, and demanding. It often pushes the host bird's own delicate chicks out of the nest to their deaths. And what does the host mother do? She works herself to the point of starvation, frantically gathering insects to drop into the gaping alien mouth of a creature 3 times her size, a creature that just murdered her true children. It is a tragic, heartbreaking spectacle, but she cannot help it. Her biological programming is firing perfectly. The rule, feed the crying thing in your nest, is so powerful that it overrides the reality of the situation. We too are bound by these beautiful, overwhelming rules. When human beings adopt a child who is entirely unrelated to them, we see the profound misfiring of a biological directive. Our genes did not evolve to raise strangers' code, but the psychological rule they implanted in us: nurture the helpless, protect the innocent, love the child in your arms, is so deeply ingrained, so intensely powerful that it transcends the cold mathematics of its origin. We are survival machines built to protect our code. But in the process of building us, the genes created something capable of profound and staggering love. It is a love born from mathematics, shaped by certainty, and bounded by time. Yet, as we shall see, this love is not without its limits. The family is a haven, but it is also a battleground. When the resources run thin, when the stakes are high, and when the interests of the individual clash with the interests of the kin, the fiercest wars of all are the ones fought under our own roofs. Chapter 5. The Family Battleground. Think of a classic family portrait. A group of people standing close together, smiling perfectly for the camera, presenting a unified front to the world. We are taught from a very young age to idealize the family as a sanctuary of infinite harmony, endless cooperation, and unconditional sacrifice. But if we peel back the sentimentality and look through the unblinking eyes of biology, the family portrait begins to look less like a serene utopia and more like a beautifully complex, highly negotiated settlement. The family is not immune to the ruthless mathematics of survival. In fact, it is the primary arena where the most intense biological negotiations take place. To understand how families truly operate in nature, we must first divide the grand concept of reproduction into 2 completely different biological decisions. We can call them bearing and caring. Bearing is the act of bringing a brand new individual into the world. Caring is the act of keeping that individual or any other existing relative alive. These 2 actions are in a constant, brutal tug-of-war. They compete for the exact same finite reservoir of time, energy, and resources within the survival machine. It might seem noble to dedicate your entire life purely to caring for those who already exist, but a pure caring strategy is mathematically doomed to fail in the grand theater of evolution. If an entire population completely stopped bearing new children to focus solely on caring, they would quickly be overrun and replaced by mutant individuals who specialize in bearing. To survive across the millennia, a survival machine must strike a perfect, precarious balance between bringing new life into the world and investing the immense effort required to keep it alive. Imagine a farmer who lives in an isolated, sun-baked valley. The soil is fertile, but the water supply is strictly limited by the unpredictable seasons. The farmer wants to secure a massive harvest to ensure his legacy, so one spring, driven by sheer ambition, he scatters 10,000 seeds across his fields. They all sprout, but there is simply not enough water in the reservoir to sustain them. The young crops fight each other for moisture. They all wither in the sun, and the farmer's harvest is 0. The following year, terrified of repeating his mistake, he is overly cautious. He plants only 20 seeds. He has plenty of water to tend to them, and they grow magnificent and strong, but he has wasted acres of potential. His neighbor, meanwhile, has painstakingly calculated the exact optimum number of seeds to plant, say 400, that perfectly balances the available water with the maximum possible number of surviving crops. The calculating neighbor ultimately dominates the valley. In the wild, survival machines act exactly like that calculating neighbor. They do not limit their family sizes out of a noble, altruistic desire to prevent global overpopulation. They are not making a voluntary sacrifice for the greater good of their species. They are selfishly, constantly optimizing. Every parent has a strictly limited amount of food, warmth, and energy to give. If they have too many offspring, those resources are spread so thin that few, if any, survive to adulthood. The parents whose code successfully dominates the future are the ones who intuitively strike the mathematical optimum, having only exactly as many children as they can successfully raise to independence. We humans sometimes have a hard time grasping this because we have fundamentally altered our environment. In the natural world, a machine that has too many offspring is brutally punished by the environment. The surplus offspring simply starve or fall to predators. But we have built a modern society of unparalleled compassion. We have created a welfare state, a social safety net where the community steps in to feed, heal, and protect those who cannot be supported by their own parents. This is one of the most beautiful and elevated achievements of our species, but biologically speaking, it is deeply unnatural. It removes the immediate biological penalty for over-reproduction, masking the unforgiving ancient arithmetic that shaped our instincts for millions of years. But the battleground is not only about how many children to have. The most intense conflicts happen once those children are already here. We intuitively assume that because parents and children share such a close genetic bond, their interests are perfectly, seamlessly aligned. We expect endless domestic harmony, but the calculus of kinship tells a far more turbulent story. Consider a scene that plays out in almost every human household. A mother has been carrying her heavy toddler down a long road for hours. Her back aches, her energy is depleted, and the child is perfectly capable of walking on its own 2 feet. She finally sets the toddler down. Instantly, the child's face crumples, and it erupts into a furious, ear-piercing tantrum. The child screams, reaches its arms up, and demands to be carried. We dismiss this as a behavioral phase, but it is actually a high-stakes biological negotiation unfolding in real time. Look at the invisible ledger of the genes. The mother shares 50% of her genetic code with the toddler crying at her feet, but she will also share 50% with any future child she might bear. Carrying a heavy toddler continually drains her physical reserves, delaying her ability to recover, gather strength, and invest in a new pregnancy. It is in her overarching genetic interest to force the toddler to walk, cutting off the investment of energy so she can prepare her body for the next vehicle. But the toddler is running a radically different set of calculations. The toddler shares 50% of its genes with any future unborn sibling, but it shares 100% of its genes with itself. The toddler is quite literally twice as valuable to itself as a future sibling is. Therefore, the toddler is biologically programmed to demand more than its mathematically fair share of the mother's resources. The tantrum is not malicious, and the child is not evil. It is simply the child's genetic code fighting tooth and nail for maximum investment. How does the child fight this battle? It cannot physically overpower the adult. Instead, it uses psychological warfare. It cries. A cry is a brilliant biological weapon, perfectly engineered to mimic the sounds of true physical distress, signaling to the parent that the child is in imminent danger. The parent is deeply, uncontrollably wired to respond to that distress signal. The child is, in a very real sense, bluffing. It is weaponizing its own apparent helplessness to extract just a little more energy, a little more warmth, and a little more time from the parent before it is finally forced into the harsh realities of independence. This exact same hidden math fuels the fierce, sometimes bitter rivalry between siblings. Picture 2 young siblings sitting at a dinner table, staring at the very last piece of food. From the parent's biological perspective, it does not matter which child gets the food, as long as it goes to the one who needs it most to survive. The parent wants to distribute resources equally to ensure the survival of both gene carriers. But from the perspective of each individual child, the equation is heavily skewed. You are related to your sibling by a factor of 1/2, but you are related to yourself by a factor of 1. You will naturally, inevitably feel that you deserve that final piece of food twice as much as your sibling does. You will argue, you will deceive, and you will fight to claim that resource. You will only stop fighting if the cost of the conflict becomes so destructive that it threatens the overall survival of the family you share. Realizing that the family is a battleground of competing biological interests does not diminish the beauty of our relationships. It actually elevates them. We are not blindly harmonious robots, mindlessly floating through domestic bliss. We are complex individuals with deeply conflicting drives, negotiating our way through the most intimate, high-stakes relationships of our lives. When we achieve peace, love, and harmony in our families, it is not because it was easily handed to us by nature. It is because we have successfully navigated the turbulent, selfish waters of our own biology, finding a transcendent balance between our innate self-interest and our profound devotion to the people we love. Chapter 6. The Mating Game. Think about the staggering amount of human energy that is poured into the pursuit of romance. Think of the songs written, the poems agonizing over unrequited love, the endless hours spent analyzing a single text message, and the crushing, breathless anxiety of a first date. We treat courtship as a mysterious, magical force that defies all logic. But beneath the poetry and the butterflies, the mating game is perhaps the most fiercely calculated, high-stakes negotiation in the entire natural world. It is a negotiation because, despite the beautiful unity of two people coming together to create life, the underlying biological interests of the two partners are fundamentally at odds. To understand why love can feel like a battlefield, we have to look at the cold, hard mathematics of reproduction. When two survival machines come together to combine their genetic code, they are entering into a joint venture to build a new life. But in almost every corner of the natural world, this joint venture begins with a massive, foundational inequality. Imagine two entrepreneurs deciding to start a business together. The first partner is required to invest their entire life savings, mortgage their house, and commit years of grueling, unpaid labor to get the company off the ground. The second partner is only required to invest the loose change they found in their pocket. If the business hits a rough patch, or if a slightly more appealing opportunity appears across town, who is more likely to abandon the company? The second partner can walk away without a second thought because their investment was practically zero. The first partner, however, is entirely trapped. They have put too much on the line to simply walk away. This is the exact dynamic that plays out at the microscopic level of biology. Across nature, the female of the species produces a sex cell, the egg, that is massive, nutrient-rich, and incredibly costly to manufacture. The male produces a sex cell, the sperm, that is microscopic, cheap, and produced by the millions. From the very moment of conception, the female has invested significantly more resources into the new life than the male has. Because of this profound initial asymmetry, the male, mathematically speaking, is biologically tempted to act like the second business partner. It is often in his genetic interest to invest his cheap, abundant code, leave the female to do the heavy lifting of gestation and child-rearing, and move on to find another partner. For the female, this desertion represents a catastrophic biological loss. She is left holding the entire burden of raising the offspring, draining her time and energy, while the male effortlessly multiplies his genetic legacy elsewhere. When we understand this brutal economic reality, all the elaborate, exhausting, and seemingly irrational rituals of courtship suddenly make perfect sense. Courtship is not just a romantic dance. It is a vital, uncompromising defense mechanism. How does the partner with the heavy investment protect themselves from being abandoned? They run a rigorous, demanding vetting process. In nature, we see females insisting on prolonged periods of courtship before they ever consent to mate. They force the male to wait, to build complex nests, to fetch food, or to engage in exhausting physical displays. This is a brilliant biological strategy to balance the scales. By forcing the male to invest a massive amount of his own time and energy up front, she changes the math of the partnership. If he abandons her after spending weeks building a nest and gathering food, he has now actually lost a significant investment. The long courtship effectively filters out the casual, uncommitted partners who are looking for a quick, cheap genetic victory, leaving only those who have proven their willingness to stay and work. We can recognize the echoes of this strategy in our own lives. The long engagements, the expectation of expensive rings, the dinners, and the endless late-night conversations are all deeply human expressions of this ancient biological audit. We test our partners. We look for proof of loyalty, signs of staying power, and evidence that they will not vanish when the initial infatuation fades and the grueling everyday work of building a family begins. But there is another, completely different strategy available in the mating game, one that abandons the hope of a loyal partnership entirely. We can call this the high-stakes gamble. Sometimes, the environment dictates that males are simply not going to stick around to help raise the young, no matter what. In these harsh arenas, the female changes her tactics completely. If she is forced to raise the children entirely on her own, she decides that she will only accept the absolute best, most spectacular genetic material available. In these species, the males do not bother with building nests or proving their loyalty. Instead, they gather in massive, highly competitive arenas to show off. They grow absurdly large antlers or brilliant, heavy tail feathers, or they sing the loudest, most complex songs. The females walk through these arenas as cold, discerning judges. They are looking for the undisputed champion. They know that a male with brilliant plumage or massive strength has proven his ability to survive despite carrying those heavy, conspicuous biological ornaments. By mating only with the absolute peak specimen, the female ensures that her children will inherit those exact same traits of health, strength, and attractiveness. She accepts the total burden of domestic labor in exchange for securing elite, championship code for her legacy. This brings us to the most dangerous and heartbreaking maneuver in the entire mating game, the act of deception. Because the stakes of reproduction are so high, survival machines are constantly tempted to cheat the system. A partner might feign loyalty, passing all the courtship tests with flying colors, only to abandon the family the moment the child is born. Or a partner might secure the loyal, hard-working devotion of a mate, but secretly seek out the elite, championship genes of a rival to actually father the child. There is no greater biological catastrophe for a survival machine than being tricked into raising the offspring of a rival. You are taking your finite, precious reservoir of time, food, and energy, and you are pouring it directly into the survival of a stranger's code while your own genes die out. This is why jealousy is one of the most powerful, searing, and destructive emotions we are capable of experiencing. It is not a modern psychological neurosis, it is a primeval alarm bell. Jealousy is the agonizing, visceral manifestation of a survival machine terrified that its life's work is being stolen. It is easy to look at the battle of the sexes and feel a sense of cynicism. It can seem as though all romance is just a calculated biological transaction, and every partnership is just a cold war waiting to go hot. But that is the wrong way to look at it. The fact that partnerships work at all is a testament to the incredible power of cooperation. Yes, the mating game is built on a foundation of profound conflicting interests. We come to the table with different biological agendas, but over millions of years we have learned to bridge that gap. We have evolved the capacity to forge deep, enduring alliances. When two people build a life together, successfully balancing their individual needs, establishing trust, and weathering the storms of existence as a united front, it is a magnificent triumph. A successful, loving partnership is not something that is freely given by nature. It is a masterpiece of negotiation. It is two separate, independent survival machines looking at each other and deciding that, despite the risks, despite the vulnerabilities, they are vastly stronger together than they could ever be apart. That negotiated peace treaty, built on top of our selfish origins, is what we call love, and it is the most powerful force we possess. Chapter 7. The Cooperative Illusion. If you have ever stood in an open field at dusk and watched a massive flock of birds moving across the sky, you have witnessed one of the most mesmerizing spectacles in nature. Thousands of individual bodies sweep, dive, and turn in perfect fluid unison. It looks like a single giant organism. It appears to be the ultimate expression of solidarity, a beautiful utopia of creatures moving in absolute harmony for the greater good of the community. But to truly understand the natural world, we must look past the poetry of the surface. We must look at the invisible, calculating forces driving the wings. When danger approaches, a hawk diving from the clouds or a wolf stepping out of the tree line, the herd or the flock instantly contracts. They pack themselves together tightly, moving as a dense, unified mass. It looks as though they are gathering to protect one another, standing shoulder to shoulder against the darkness. But the biological reality is far more ruthless. Imagine you are an animal grazing on an open plain and a predator appears on the horizon. Your overriding biological imperative is to survive. The most effective way to ensure you are not eaten is to ensure that the predator encounters someone else first. If you are standing alone, you are entirely vulnerable. But if you quickly move to stand beside another animal, you instantly cut your risk in half. The predator now has to choose between the two of you. If you move so that the other animal is standing directly between you and the predator, your risk drops even further. You are using your neighbor as a living shield. Now, multiply that exact same selfish calculation by 10,000 individuals, all happening in the exact same millisecond. Every single animal in the herd is desperately trying to maneuver itself behind another animal. They are all plunging toward the exact center of the group, because the center is the only place surrounded entirely by living shields. The breathtaking, fluid coordination of the flock is not an act of community. It is a rapid, inward collapsing geometry of fear. It is a collection of entirely selfish machines, all trying to hide behind one another. This is the cooperative illusion. In nature, much of what looks like selfless community spirit is actually the profound, calculated self-interest of the individual. But this raises a fascinating question. If the herd is so selfish, what about the animals that seem to put themselves at risk to warn the others? We have all seen documentaries where a grazing animal suddenly spots a predator lurking in the tall grass. Instead of slipping away quietly, the animal leaps spectacularly high into the air, bouncing on stiff legs, making itself incredibly conspicuous. It seems like an act of glorious heroism. The animal is deliberately drawing attention to itself to warn the herd, sacrificing its own safety so that others may live. But look at the interaction again, not from the perspective of the herd, but from the perspective of the predator. The predator is a calculating survival machine too. It is looking for an easy meal. It wants to target the weak, the old, the sick, or the unwary. When an animal spots the predator and begins to leap wildly into the air, it is not talking to its friends. It is broadcasting a message directly to the hunter. The leaping animal is demonstrating absolute, undeniable physical fitness. It is communicating a very specific selfish message. I have seen you. I am incredibly athletic. Look at how much energy I have to waste by jumping in the same spot. If you chase me, you will exhaust yourself and you will fail. Go catch one of the others who didn't see you. It is a brilliant private negotiation between prey and predator. The predator watches the display, processes the information, and realizes that chasing this highly alert, athletic individual is a terrible investment of its own energy. The predator turns its attention to the slower members of the herd. The leaping animal has saved its own life, not through heroic sacrifice, but through a spectacular display of selfish dominance. If this is true, if everything is driven by this relentless pursuit of self-preservation, how do we explain the times when animals truly do help each other? How do we explain the moments when survival machines lower their defenses, share their resources, and cooperate without the bond of family tying them together? To understand this, we must look at one of the most powerful evolutionary forces on the planet, the problem of the parasite. Every animal has places on its own body that it simply cannot reach. If a blood-sucking parasite attaches itself to the back of an animal's neck, that animal is in trouble. It cannot see the parasite, and it cannot pull it off. It desperately needs someone else to remove it. If two unrelated animals meet in the forest and one has a parasite on its back, a mutually beneficial arrangement seems obvious. The first animal allows the second to clean its back, and in return the first animal cleans the back of the second. It is a perfect, reciprocal exchange. But the invisible ledger of the genes makes this transaction incredibly dangerous. Cleaning a stranger requires time, focus, and energy. It means taking your eyes off the environment and lowering your guard. If you clean a stranger's back, you pay a biological cost. What guarantees that the stranger will return the favor? What stops the stranger from taking the free cleaning and simply walking away, leaving you with your own parasites and less energy than you started with? This is the fundamental problem of trust. In the short term, the most profitable biological strategy is always to cheat. It is always better to take the free help and refuse to pay it back. If you imagine a population made entirely of naive, unconditionally generous animals, They would spend all their time cleaning each other. But if a single, selfish mutant was born into this population, an animal that took the cleanings but never gave them, it would thrive. It would save all its energy, live longer, and reproduce faster. The unconditional helpers would exhaust themselves, and the exploiters would multiply until they dominated the world. But an entirely selfish world is also doomed. When the generous helpers finally die out, the exploiters face a catastrophic crisis. They are entirely surrounded by other exploiters. When they get a parasite on their neck, no one helps them. The entire population becomes infested, weak, and sick. The system collapses under the weight of its own greed. For cooperation to survive the brutal test of evolution, a third type of personality had to emerge. It could not be unconditionally generous, and it could not be purely selfish. It had to be something far more sophisticated. It required the invention of a revolutionary biological tool, a memory. Imagine an animal that approaches the world with cautious optimism. When it meets a stranger in need, it helps. It cleans the stranger's back. But this animal possesses a sharp, unforgiving memory. It remembers the faces of those it interacts with. If that stranger later returns the favor, a bond of trust is established, and the two animals continue to help each other over their lifetimes, reaping massive biological rewards. But if the stranger takes the free cleaning and runs away, the cautious animal burns that face into its memory. It holds a grudge. It will never, ever help that specific exploiter again. Over the long, unforgiving span of evolutionary time, the animals with a memory utterly dominate the world. They starve out the exploiters by refusing to be used, and they build immensely profitable, lifelong networks of mutual aid with other trusted individuals. They discover that the absolute best way to ensure the survival of their own selfish code is to build a community of reliable, cooperating partners. This simple, beautiful mechanism, reciprocal altruism, is the invisible bedrock of our entire human world. We are not solitary machines drifting in a void. We are a species that has mastered the art of the conditional promise. When you look at human society, at the staggering complexity of our economies, our legal systems, and our communities, you are looking at the ultimate triumph of the cautious cooperator. The deep, visceral emotions we feel every day, the warm wash of gratitude when someone does us a favor, the burning sting of righteous anger when we are cheated, the heavy sinking weight of guilt when we fail someone we care about. These are not just poetic quirks of the human soul. They are the highly sophisticated psychological tools built by our genes to manage our vast networks of trust. We are survival machines, yes. We are driven by ancient, immortal code that wants nothing more than to endure. But in its infinite blind brilliance, that code discovered something magnificent. It discovered that you do not have to fight the entire world to survive. It discovered that if you can remember a face, if you can keep a promise, and if you can learn to trust, you can achieve things that no individual could ever accomplish alone. The illusion of cooperation, when practiced long enough and remembered well enough, becomes the most powerful reality on Earth. Chapter 8. The Mind Virus. Up to this point, we have been looking at life through a very specific, fiercely biological lens. We have traced the epic journey of microscopic code as it built armored shells, sharp teeth, and complex brains. We have reduced the magnificent dramas of family, romance, and community down to the cold, calculating mathematics of survival and reproduction. If you look at a wolf, a hawk, or a towering oak tree, this biological lens explains almost everything about their existence. They are perfectly engineered survival machines, and they follow the ancient script written in their cells. But when you turn that same lens on humanity, something feels profoundly incomplete. The biological script suddenly fails to explain the world around us. Look at the way we actually live. People dedicate their entire lives to painting canvases that serve no practical purpose. People take vows of silence and poverty, deliberately choosing to never reproduce. People sacrifice their lives for abstract concepts like justice, liberty, or a flag. We build soaring cathedrals, we obsess over shifting fashion trends, and we spend years mastering musical instruments. None of these actions help us gather more calories. None of them protect us from predators. In many cases, these behaviors actively sabotage our chances of biological reproduction. If we are nothing more than biological robots programmed to ensure the survival of our genetic code, Human culture looks like a massive, catastrophic malfunction. To solve this magnificent puzzle, we have to recognize a fundamental truth about the universe. The great law of evolution, the survival of the stable, is not restricted to chemistry. It is not exclusively bound to DNA. DNA happens to be the most successful replicating entity we know of, but it does not hold a monopoly on evolution. The universe only requires one simple condition for an evolutionary process to ignite: a replicator. Anytime, anywhere. If you introduce an entity that is capable of making copies of itself, a fierce, blind competition for survival will automatically begin. For billions of years, the only soup on this planet capable of supporting a replicator was the physical chemical broth of the oceans and the cells. But very recently, in the blink of a geological eye, a brand new kind of soup emerged on Earth. It was an environment of unprecedented potential generated by the massively expanded brains of early humans. This new soup was human culture. It was the realm of language, memory, and shared consciousness. And right on schedule, the moment this new environment was rich enough, a new kind of replicator was born into it. This new replicator does not have a physical body, it does not have a cellular wall, and it is not made of chemical acids. It is an idea. It is a melody, a recipe, a political philosophy, a way of building a wheel, or a style of clothing. We are used to thinking of ideas as passive things, as fleeting thoughts that we consciously create and discard. But if you look at how ideas actually behave, you will see that they operate exactly like living, breathing, ruthless viruses. Imagine you are walking through a crowded market and you hear someone whistling a completely novel, syncopated rhythm. The rhythm enters your ear and your brain processes it. It is catchy. It resonates. Hours later, while you are walking home, you unconsciously start whistling that exact same tune. A neighbor hears you whistling it from their porch, and the next morning they are humming it while they work. What just happened? The melody replicated. It leapt from the original whistler's brain into your brain, and then from your brain into your neighbor's brain. It did not need to physically travel. It used the airwaves and the incredibly receptive environment of human memory to copy itself. It is a living, propagating structure. When a powerful idea takes hold in your mind, it physically alters the wiring of your nervous system, turning your brain into a temporary factory dedicated to broadcasting that idea to others. Just like the ancient molecules in the primeval oceans, these ideas are locked in a fierce, silent competition. But what are they fighting over? They do not need sunlight or protein. They are competing for a far more precious and strictly limited resource: human attention. Your brain only has so much bandwidth. You only have so much memory, and you only have so much time in a day to communicate. If a new political ideology takes up total residence in your mind, it actively crowds out other, competing philosophies. Therefore, the ideas that survive across generations are not necessarily the most truthful ideas, or the most noble, or the most comforting. The ideas that survive are simply the ones that are best equipped to capture attention and demand replication. How does an idea ensure its own survival? It undergoes the exact same process of blind trial and error that shaped our physical bodies. Think of a simple, practical concept like a specific technique for starting a fire with 2 sticks. A person discovers it, uses it, and teaches it to their children. But when the children teach their children, they make a slight mistake. They use a different kind of wood, or they change the angle of the friction. If that mistake makes the fire start faster, the new, mutated idea becomes wildly popular. It spreads rapidly through the tribe, completely overriding the old method. The idea evolved. But the most fascinating and powerful replicators of the mind are not simple tools or catchy tunes. They are massive, complex belief systems. Just as single genes eventually realized that they could survive better by banding together to build complex bodies, single ideas often band together to build massive ideological empires. Consider a deeply entrenched philosophical or religious movement. It is not a single thought. It is a brilliantly cooperative syndicate of ideas. One idea offers a comforting explanation for the creation of the universe. Another idea offers a set of moral rules that organize the community. Together, they form a highly attractive, cohesive worldview. But to survive across centuries, this complex of ideas must develop defense mechanisms to protect itself from rival concepts. In the biological world, survival machines evolved immune systems to fight off foreign invaders. In the cultural world, Belief systems evolve psychological immune systems. A highly successful belief system often includes a built-in instruction that says, you must unquestioningly teach this entire system to your children while their minds are young and receptive. It acts as a reproductive mandate. Furthermore, the belief system might include a deeply terrifying warning. To question any part of this system or to listen to rival ideas is a catastrophic moral failure that will result in your permanent ruin. When you look at this objectively, you are witnessing an absolute masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. The belief system has built a protective, impenetrable wall around the host's mind. It successfully paralyzes the human tendency for skepticism, ensuring that the host will preserve the ideas perfectly and transmit them faithfully to the next generation. The ideas do not care if they are causing the host anxiety or fear. They only care about their own continued replication. This brings us to the most spectacular and unique phenomenon in the history of our planet. For billions of years, the biological code held undisputed, tyrannical control over everything that lived. Every action taken by every animal was ultimately in service to the survival of its DNA. But when human beings unwittingly gave birth to this second kind of replicator, the replicator of the mind, we inadvertently created a rival power. These two forces, the biological and the cultural, often work in harmony, but occasionally they go to war. Consider a person who decides to lay down their life for a political revolution, or a leader who chooses to remain childless so they can dedicate every waking hour to humanitarian work. From the perspective of the biological genes, these actions are colossal, tragic failures. The biological code is screaming at the individual to avoid danger, to seek comfort, and to reproduce at all costs. But the mind virus, the powerful, encompassing idea of justice or duty or art, has taken absolute control of the executive computer. The idea has become so deeply entrenched, so powerful and highly valued in the host's brain that it successfully overrides the ancient biological mandate. The person sacrifices their body, ensuring their DNA will perish, but in doing so, they guarantee that their ideas, their philosophy, and their legend will replicate across thousands of minds for generations to come. The cultural code wins the war over the biological code. This is the great liberating secret of our existence. We are the only creatures on Earth built by one kind of replicator and hijacked by another. We are caught in the crossfire between our ancient, selfish biological programming and the swirling, evolving landscape of our own culture. But because we play host to these two massive forces, we are granted a power that no other survival machine has ever possessed. We have the capacity to step back and observe the machinery that runs us. We can recognize the selfish biological drives that push us toward tribalism, greed, and conflict. We can also recognize the cultural viruses that attempt to infect our minds with blind obedience and rigid dogma. Because we can understand the forces that seek to control us, we are uniquely equipped to defeat them. We are not bound to be the slaves of our DNA, nor are we required to be the unthinking vessels of the culture we were born into. We have the power of conscious foresight. We have the ability to imagine a future based on deliberate, chosen values rather than blind replication. We, alone on this planet, have the power to rebel against our creators. Chapter 9. The Triumph of Goodness. If you have followed this journey from the swirling chaos of the primeval oceans to the fierce battlegrounds of the family, you might be carrying a heavy sense of despair. We have unmasked the romantic illusions of the natural world, revealing a landscape dominated by ruthless, calculating survival machines. We have seen how the immortal code inside us drives us to deceive our rivals, manipulate our mates, and fight bitterly for our own preservation. It can feel as though biology has condemned us to a life of perpetual, unyielding selfishness. You might be wondering if there is any room left in the universe for genuine decency, for trust, or for the simple act of being good. There is. And the most breathtaking revelation of all is that goodness is not an evolutionary accident. It is not a glitch in the selfish programming, nor is it a fragile, artificial concept invented by human civilization. Goodness, trust, and forgiveness are mathematically robust survival strategies. Under the right conditions, they are the most powerful and unconquerable forces in the natural world. To understand how goodness can emerge from a crucible of pure self-interest, we must look at a profound paradox of logic. We can call it the dilemma of the blind trade. Imagine two strangers living in a harsh, unforgiving wilderness, separated by a deep valley. A brutal winter is approaching. The first stranger has an abundance of firewood, but no food. The second stranger has a massive stockpile of food, but no wood to keep warm. If they do not trade, they will both surely die. They agree to a blind exchange. At midnight, they will each walk to a hollow tree at the center of the valley, drop off their surplus, take the other person's goods, and return home. As the first stranger walks toward the hollow tree in the dark, a cold, inescapable logic takes hold of his mind. He realizes he has a choice. He can leave the valuable firewood in the hollow tree, or he can leave a pile of useless rocks. He calculates the possible outcomes. Suppose the other stranger is honest and leaves the food. If our traveler leaves his firewood, he survives the winter. But if he leaves rocks, he gets the food and he keeps his firewood. He wins twice over, while the honest stranger freezes to death. Now, suppose the other stranger is a cheat and leaves rocks. If our traveler leaves his firewood, he is left with nothing and dies while the cheat prospers. If he leaves rocks, neither gets anything, and they both suffer equally. The mathematical conclusion hits him like a physical blow. Regardless of what the other person does, the absolute best strategy for the individual is to cheat. If the other person is honest, cheating brings a massive reward. If the other person cheats, cheating is the only way to avoid being completely destroyed. The logic is flawless, uncompromising, and deeply tragic. Of course, the stranger on the other side of the valley is a rational survival machine as well. He runs the exact same calculation, and he comes to the exact same inevitable conclusion. At midnight, they both arrive at the hollow tree. They both leave a pile of heavy, useless rocks. They both return to their cabins, and they both freeze and starve to death. This is the catastrophic trap of pure selfishness. When two logical machines meet in a one-time, isolated encounter, they are mathematically doomed to mutually assure their own destruction. If the entire world operated as a series of isolated, one-off encounters, the earth would be a wasteland of suspicion and death. But the world is rarely a one-time encounter. The game of survival is played over and over again. The strangers in the valley do not just meet once, they live next to each other for their entire lives. They must interact every single week, season after season. This repetition introduces the most powerful, transformative element in all of biology, the shadow of the future. When you know you will have to deal with the same individual tomorrow, next month, and next year, the math of the blind trade fundamentally changes. You can no longer afford to cheat today because your partner will remember it and refuse to trade with you tomorrow. The shadow of the future forces survival machines to adopt long-term strategies. Imagine a vast computer simulation where we test different psychological strategies against each other to see who survives the endless, repeated winters of the valley. First, we introduce the pure exploiter. This strategy is simple: always cheat, always leave rocks, and try to take advantage of everyone. Next, we introduce the saint. The saint is unconditionally generous. They always leave firewood, even if they are cheated. When the saint meets the exploiter, it is a massacre. The exploiter takes everything, the saint dies, and the exploitative code multiplies. Seeing this, we might introduce a much tougher strategy: the grudger. The grudger starts out honest and leaves firewood, but if they are ever cheated even once, they never forget. For the rest of their lives, they will only leave rocks for that specific individual. The grudger protects itself from the exploiter, but it is prone to tragic, endless blood feuds. If two grudgers have a simple misunderstanding, perhaps one drops their firewood in the dark by accident, they will retaliate against each other forever, locking themselves into a spiral of mutual destruction. Finally, we introduce a strategy so simple, so elegant, and so profound that it consistently beats every other personality in the simulation. We can call it the mirror. The mirror follows 4 very specific rules. First, it is nice. It never ever cheats first. It begins every relationship with an honest trade, extending an open hand of trust. Second, it is retaliatory. It is not a sucker. If someone leaves rocks, the mirror immediately hits back. The next time they trade, the mirror will leave rocks to punish the cheater. Third, and most importantly, the mirror is forgiving. It has a short memory. If the cheater decides to apologize and go back to leaving firewood, the mirror instantly forgives the past betrayal and goes back to being honest. It does not hold a long-term grudge. Finally, the mirror is non-envious. It does not care if the other person is also getting rich, as long as its own absolute wealth is increasing. When the mirror is dropped into the chaotic simulation of exploiters, saints, and grudges, something miraculous happens. The mirror immediately begins building highly profitable, lifelong relationships with other mirrors. Because they are both nice, they never betray each other. They trade successfully week after week, growing wealthy and secure. When a mirror meets an exploiter, the exploiter wins the first round. But the mirror immediately retaliates, cutting off the exploiter's supply. The exploiter is left isolated, unable to extract any more resources, while the mirror simply turns to its honest neighbors and continues to thrive. Over the generations, the exploiters starve each other out. The grudgers wipe each other out in endless, bitter feuds. The mirrors, however, quietly and efficiently dominate the world. They do not win by destroying their opponents. They win by extracting the maximum possible resources from the environment, side by side with their fellow cooperators. The success of the mirror strategy teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of the universe. We are deeply conditioned by our culture to view life as a zero-sum game. We think of life like a tennis match, where every point I win is a point you lose. In a zero-sum game, the only way to succeed is to crush the person standing across from you. If you are playing a zero-sum game, being nice is a terrible strategy, but the reality of nature and the reality of human existence is overwhelmingly non-zero-sum. We are not playing a tennis match against each other. We are playing together against the harshness of the environment, against disease, against poverty, and against the cold winter. When two survival machines choose to cooperate, they create new wealth. They generate a massive surplus of survival that neither could have achieved alone. The banker wins, but so does the borrower. In a non-zero-sum world, the highest absolute scores are achieved by those who are willing to trust and who are strong enough to forgive. This is why, despite our selfish origins, our world is overflowing with goodness. It is why you feel a deep, warm rush of satisfaction when you help a neighbor, and why you feel an innate, powerful urge to forgive someone who sincerely apologizes. These emotions are not cultural artifacts. They are the ancient, highly sophisticated software written by our genes to help us navigate the non-zero-sum game of life. The immortal code is cold, blind, and indifferent. It only cares about its own replication, but in its relentless pursuit of immortality, it stumbled upon the greatest survival mechanism of all. It discovered that an open hand is ultimately far more powerful than a clenched fist. It discovered that niceness, backed by strength and tempered by forgiveness, is the ultimate stable strategy. You do not need to look to the heavens or rely on abstract philosophy to justify being a good person. You simply need to look at the math. In the grand, unyielding casino of evolution, the ruthless exploiters eventually burn themselves out in the dark. It is the cooperators, the forgivers, and the builders of trust who quietly inherit the earth. Chapter 10. The Boundless Reach. Hold your hand up in front of your face and look at it closely. Where do you end, and where does the rest of the universe begin? The answer seems so obvious that it is almost absurd to ask. Your boundary is your skin. Everything inside that waterproof, sensitive barrier is you, and everything outside of it is the external world. We navigate our entire lives based on this absolute, unquestioned physical boundary. But if we follow the logic of the immortal code to its ultimate, mind-bending conclusion, we are about to discover that this boundary is a profound illusion. Throughout our journey, we have treated the living body as the ultimate masterpiece of the genes. We have seen how the code builds muscles, weaves nerves, and programs instincts to navigate a hostile world. We have recognized the profound distinction between the replicator, which is the immortal information traveling through time, and the vehicle, which is the temporary organism that carries it. It is crucial to remember that these are two completely distinct kinds of units, and failing to recognize this distinction leads to deep confusion. The body is the vehicle. But does the influence of the replicator truly stop at the edge of the vehicle's skin? Imagine a vast, pristine river valley. For centuries, the water has flowed freely, cutting a winding path through the soil. One spring, a small furry animal with large teeth arrives in the valley. It begins to systematically gnaw down trees, dragging the heavy logs into the rushing water. It packs the gaps with mud and stones, working tirelessly day and night. Within a few weeks, the river is choked off. A massive dam now spans the water. The river backs up, flooding the valley and creating a deep, still, expansive lake. The entire ecosystem is utterly transformed. New fish arrive, waterfowl settle on the surface, and the local climate itself subtly shifts because of the massive new body of water. Why did the animal do this? It built the dam to create a deep moat of water, ensuring that predators could not reach its lodge in the center. The dam is an extraordinarily effective survival tool. Now, look at the invisible ledger of the code. The genes inside that animal built its sharp teeth, its waterproof fur, and its powerful tail. But those same genes also programmed the animal's brain with the obsessive, intricate blueprint for felling trees and stopping rivers. If a gene for sharper teeth helps the animal survive, that gene multiplies. But exactly the same logic applies to the dam. A gene that programs a slightly more watertight dam, or a slightly stronger mud foundation, protects the animal better. The animal survives, and the better dam gene is passed on. This means that the lake, the dam, and the transformed valley are not just incidental byproducts of the animal's behavior. They are physical expressions of the animal's DNA. The lake is as much a part of the animal's genetic architecture as its own teeth or its own fur. The code sitting microscopically inside the nucleus of a cell has reached out, far beyond the boundary of the skin, and completely redesigned the geology of the Earth to ensure its own survival. Once you understand this, the world changes before your eyes. A bird's nest is not just a pile of twigs. It is a physical extension of the bird's genetic code, reaching out to manipulate the branches of a tree into a warm, protective incubator. A spider's web is not just silk. It is an invisible, extended hunting appendage, spun by the genes to snare food out of the empty air. The reach of the code is boundless. It manipulates the mud, the wood, and the wind. But the most haunting and extraordinary aspect of this boundless reach is that it does not just manipulate dead matter. Sometimes the code reaches out and manipulates the living flesh of other survival machines. Consider a tiny, ground-dwelling insect living in a dense forest. For millions of years, this insect has been perfectly programmed to fear the light. It scurries under rotting logs, hides beneath fallen leaves, and never exposes itself to the open sky, because the open sky is where the birds hunt. Its fear of the light is its primary survival mechanism. But one day, the insect accidentally ingests a microscopic spore hidden in the dirt. The spore belongs to a parasitic fungus. Once inside the insect's stomach, the fungal code wakes up. The fungus does not just passively consume the host's nutrients. Its genes begin to actively manufacture highly specific, mind-altering chemical compounds. These chemicals seep into the insect's bloodstream and travel directly to its brain. Suddenly, the insect's behavior radically changes. It abandons its lifelong fear of the open air. Driven by an irresistible alien compulsion, the insect crawls out from under the safety of the logs. It marches over the dirt, finds the tallest, most exposed blade of grass in the area, and climbs all the way to the absolute tip. It clamps its jaws onto the grass with a death grip and simply waits there, perfectly silhouetted against the bright sky. Within an hour, a passing bird spots the helpless insect, swoops down, and swallows it whole. Why did the insect commit this spectacular suicide? Because the parasitic fungus can only complete its reproductive life cycle inside the warm, acidic stomach of a bird. The fungus needed a way to get from the forest floor into the sky. So the fungal genes reached out across the boundaries of species, hacked into the nervous system of a completely different animal, and drove it like a hijacked vehicle right into the mouth of its target. In that haunting moment on the blade of grass, the insect's body was no longer working for its own genes. Its muscles and nerves had been co-opted. The boundaries between the two survival machines dissolved. The fungal code effectively extended its reach, claiming the insect's body as a remote-controlled extension of its own phenotype. In the grand tapestry of nature, we sometimes even find that certain rogue segments of DNA work against the interests of the very genome they reside in, acting as pure parasitic code manipulating the system from within. This realization is the final, ultimate paradigm shift. The world is not a collection of isolated, sealed-off robots walking past one another. The entire globe is a shimmering, interconnected web of code, Every living thing is constantly reaching out, broadcasting signals, building structures, and attempting to pull the strings of the environment and the creatures around it. The air is thick with the invisible negotiations of immortal information. And where does that leave us? We are the heirs to this ancient, relentless legacy. We are the most magnificent, complex survival machines ever constructed. Our brains are capable of running simulations so vivid that we can invent mathematics, compose symphonies, and launch vessels to the stars. Yet, beneath our clothing and our culture, we are still vessels for the ancient code. We still feel the primal pull of self-preservation, the fierce, calculating love of family, and the urge to build, manipulate, and secure our place in the world. But our story does not end with blind obedience to the replicators. That is the triumph of our species. By looking deeply into the mirror of biology, by refusing to look away from the cold, hard truths of our origins, we achieve something no other creature has ever managed. We see the strings. We can understand why we feel the urge to act selfishly, and because we understand it, we can choose to be generous. We can understand the biological roots of our tribal conflicts, and because we understand them, we can choose to build wider, more inclusive alliances of trust. We can recognize the cultural viruses that seek to hijack our attention, and we can choose to cultivate our own beliefs. The reach of the genes may be boundless, but the reach of human consciousness is greater still. We have the privilege, the burden, and the unparalleled beauty of standing at the pinnacle of evolutionary history, looking back at the blind forces that made us, and deciding for ourselves what kind of world we are going to build next.